difficulties, I'll ask you to mute yourself if you haven't already. You do that by pressing *# on your phone or just selecting the mute feature on your telephone. And then Kathy and I will let you go, but again, go ahead and mute yourself if you haven't already. Again, feel free to share your questions and comments in the pod in the lower left-hand corner, and we'll be sure to get those shared with our presenter. And again, we'll send out the recording, the transcript, and the presentation afterwards, but you can also download Rick's presentation. It'll be on the last window along with those polls in the lower left-hand corner. You just double-click on it, and you can download it directly from the viewing window. And I'm going to hand it over to David here to let us know what's coming up before I introduce Rick.
Thank you, Jessica. Good afternoon, everybody. I feel like the eFirst activities are moving as fast as summer's going here on us. It's hard to keep up with everything as time goes on. We have several exciting things going on right now with new posting of some rule definitions for rate restructuring by Medicaid. There'll be various work groups and webinars occurring over the next few weeks to learn a little bit more about that, but that's been a work in progress that everybody's had some input on, so I'm sure people will be interested in getting updated on that. We also will be moving forward with the completion of a employee handbook that'll be primarily used for case managers out there, that'll contain employment definitions and employment processes that DHS and Medicaid have put together that will really help, I think, help us be consistent as we implement some changes next fall. We're excited with our presenter today to have Rick talk a little bit about promising practices in the area of transition and how we can be more effective as we work with our youth. And that leads into next month's webinar, which will be August 25th, which will hear some Iowa stories about what we're doing in transition. Kim Drew, a consultant from the Department of Education, will share a little bit from the state perspective. And then we have one of our community providers, Janet Phelps from Van Buren Job Opportunities, will share with Cindy Whalen, our VR counselor, kind of their collaborative efforts to work together to move employment forward. And then in September, which is our last scheduled community of practice, on September 22nd, we'll kind of have a wrap-up of several different topics of representing providers. Goodwill of the Heartland will share a little bit about some of their employment experiences. Bill Stump will share he and his son Kyle's journey on employment, so we'll get a little bit of the parent-family perspective. David Van Ningen from Hope Haven will share a little bit about regional collaboration and what they're working on. And then we'll also, I believe, have Representative Dave Heaton on, and he'll be able to share a little bit from the legislative process, his perspective, and he'll be able to hear some of those stories of what we've been working on over the last year. So we have a lot of things going on, but we'll focus today on transition, and I'll turn it back over to Jessica to introduce Rick.
Thanks, David. I have the great pleasure of introducing Rick Hawes to you guys today. Myself and a number of other Iowans had the pleasure of spending some time with Rick back in November of 2014. Rick came all the way from Berkshire County, Massachusetts, to work with a number of you that I see that are on the phone today around some transformation and strategic planning efforts as it related to your different employment programs. Rick has extensive history in employment, including both sheltered and community-based employment, and has over 20 years of transition experience working with youth in his area. And if I remember right, Rick, Berkshire County is pretty small, very rural, and serves about 4,000 to 5,000 per county in that area. So Rick has a lot of great experience that he's bringing to us today, and we're really excited to have him. He'll tell you a little bit more about his experience and all the great things that he's learned in transition, including those successful practices in transition. So I'll hand it over to you, Rick, and thanks so much for joining us.
Well, good day, everyone. As Jessica said, I had the distinct opportunity last fall to come to Iowa, and one of my takeaways was really what a beautiful state. I didn't realize how diverse the geography and topography was, having lived my entire life up here in the Northeast in New England and upstate New York. So I'm hoping today that I can share the initiatives, the best practices, and the success stories that we have had out here, and to assist you in your quest to providing effective school-to-career transition services. You're probably wondering, I know Jessica gave a thank you for that nice introduction, but I'm sure you're wondering who I am. So, given the nature that this is a webinar, this is as interactive as I think we can get. So there's me in Italy. I know you may not care, but that's all right. But let me tell you a little bit about myself. I actually started off as a special education teacher. I got my degree in special education. I actually taught high school special education, and then I gravitated. I got my master's and so forth. And basically, over the past 35 years, I've been in vocational services. I actually was a director of a sheltered workshop. I was an operations manager, and for the past 25 years, I've overseen employment services here in a very rural county. That's about 2.5 hours from Boston, 2.5 hours from New York, but it's very rural. Not quite as rural, from what I gather, as in Iowa, but rural for upstate New England. And anyway. But school-to-career transitions is something that's very near and dear to my heart. As a special ed teacher, when I was 22, 23 years old, well, let's put it this way, I wish I knew now what I knew then. But it's something very near and dear to my heart, and it's something that, we as a provider, as providers, as state agency personnel and so forth, need to do a better job on. Why? Well, let me just give you a quick introduction here. A number of years ago, this guy, John, came to us. He was 24 years old, unemployed, out of school, and I met with my staff, and I met with him, and I said, so, John, what have you been doing? I don't know. You got a job? No. Well, so what have you been doing for the past couple of years? Oh, nothing. I said, well, what happened in school? Well, I didn't get much in school. And I said, well, where was the state agency? Well, they didn't hook me up with the state agency. Well, what about your parents? Well, they didn't help out at all. So here was this guy. He's 24 years old, and we're finally getting him. Well, and what happened was we did a career plan. We found him a job. He failed in his first job after 6 months. And then he failed in his second job. And at one point we decided, well, gee, should we continue to serve this gentleman? And we decided to commit to him. By his third job, by the time he was 26, we got him into a great job. We worked on his soft skills and all that stuff, and he became very successfully employed. But he was 26 years old, and that's not how the services should work. Quite frankly, it's an example of the failure of the school system, the failure of the state agencies, and quite frankly, the failure of the parents to provide and to assist, this young man to successfully transition into the school of work. And this happened about 20 years ago, and he's been productively employed since then. But what I'm going to try to do today is try to, give you some of our best practices so you can avoid and not have these case studies like John, in your counties and in your services. So let me just tell you a little bit about the history of our agency. As Jessica said, we're located in a very rural county. And basically, what's very interesting about Massachusetts is it's very different than Iowa. There's like over 90 employment providers in the state of Massachusetts. And so everybody serves about 100, so forth, numbers of people. So there's a number of providers who provide a smaller numbers of service for people. But be that as it may, since I took over 25 years ago, we've assisted over 300 people with disabilities to become successfully employed over the past 25 years. We closed our sheltered workshop, and actually I was hired in 1990. One of the things that drew me here, because I was in upstate New York, was that they wanted to close their sheltered workshop. So it was my job back in 1990 to lead the crusade to get everybody out of our sheltered workshop and get them all working in the community. And we did that. And since, well, and actually we did it before 1998, but we literally closed the doors to our sheltered workshop in 1998. And we've been operating total community-based employment services since that time. We've also when we closed our sheltered workshop, we said, okay, so what's next? Well, we looked at several initiatives, but really felt that the school to career, that was the future, that was the greatest need, at least around here, of where are the youth and where are the people with disabilities going to be coming from? Well, they're going to be coming up through the school system. So we committed to really providing school to career transition services, here in Berkshire County, as stated here. Also, back in 2008, we ended up getting a $500,000 collaboration grant, and we wrote the grant. Actually, I wrote the grant to improve the employment of youth with disabilities in this county, and it was met with incredible success. We got the business leaders, we got all the vocational, all the state agencies, we got school district, every single school district involved. We got individuals involved, advocates, and so forth, and we created these wonderful systems. We trained educators. We had these employer recognition breakfasts. We marketed, this. We set up internships programs. Anyways, we did a wide range of things to establish and maintain good collaboration amongst all the key holders here in this particular county. So that's a little bit about our background. All right, so what services do we provide, and why is this so important? Well, if you're going to be providing school to career transition services, you must, especially you providers out there, you have to have a comprehensive set of services in order to provide school to career contracted services with the school districts. And obviously, it starts with, a very person-centered, community-based, individualized vocational assessment. We got rid of 20 years ago doing assessments in our sheltered workshop. All of our assessments, we spend, I have a couple of professional vocational evaluators, and what they do is they meet with the individual, but the vocational assessments are very experiential, and they're done in real places of employment based upon the interests of the individual. And what happens is that vocational assessment becomes the blueprint or the foundation by which, employment plans are made and also recommendations for the school systems. So it's absolutely critical, if you're going to be doing school to career transitions, you have to have this component because it creates the blueprint, but it also is a service that most school systems do not have the capability of doing. They just don't have the expertise or the resources to do this kind of thing. The second thing is you obviously need to have community-based skills training. This could involve some soft skills training, but more importantly, a myriad of options from work trials to internships to part-time jobs, a variety of real work experiences for a student or a young person with disability to experience, in the community and to assist them in their eventual transition from school to full-time employment. Obviously, you need to have job development and placement, career, person-centered career planning and job matching. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because I would imagine you people know this already. Obviously, you're going to need to have the service for doing on-the-job training, job coaching. You're going to need to have, all the initial ongoing supports. And the key on this is when you're going to provide services for school to career and for students in schools, you have to have a wide range of employment options. I can't tell you, we have done everything from part-time employment to full-time to half-days to internships to, what will happen in that person-centered approach based upon the age of the student, the amount of money the school has to spend, and where the student is in terms of their transition. You need to be prepared to provide a wide range of employment services for those people. So, in essence, if you're going to be doing school to career transitions, you need to make sure that you have a full spectrum and a comprehensive set of services in order to do it. All right, here we go. All right, so we're going to go through this one at a time here. This is the meat of the presentation. Okay, so what have we found in terms of best practices to make school to career transitions successful? Well, the first and foremost, I know this is going to be tough for some of you, but this is having an absolute commitment to the employment first philosophy. Basically, The goal is to get an individual into the student or the young person into an individual placement on company payroll and to have them to be as independent and to be as integrated as possible into a job. That basically means no, they're not going to go to the sheltered workshop. We're going to try to find them and find and maintain a job for them in the community. Why are we doing this? Well, I'm sure you guys are probably getting hammered as well. The employment first philosophy, from what I'm gathering, is happening in Iowa as well. I mean, and so the state and federal regs are pushing, states to do this. But quite frankly, from my experience over the past 20 years, I'll tell you, I can't tell you the number of absolutely incredible success stories we've had when we've been able to contract with the school systems, work with a student, get them a job, and literally when they walk out of high school, they're already employed and they're doing well. There is no intrinsically better feeling in the world than creating that kind of success story. And when you start doing it, it just snowballs. So the first, once again, you have to have a commitment that the student is not going to go to the sheltered workshop, that they're going to have a job, and that they're going to be integrated into the business community when they graduate. The second component of this is that you have to establish goals to accomplish the ideal transition. Specifically, our goal with every student that we work with that's still in school, our goal is to have that individual in a job by the date they either graduate or they're leaving school. That's our goal. Now, what ends up happening is then you set up a whole series of implementation strategies from there. The whole process by which and that goes back to my previous slide, which is talking about doing an assessment, doing some skills training, doing some internships, doing some part-time jobs, doing career planning, all of that stuff, hopefully and ideally can be done while the student is still in school, so that when they walk out of school, not only do they have a job, but they're also hooked in with the state the state agency that they're supposed to be funded by. So, if you're going to be establishing, or if you already have established it, it's always important to look at the goals of your program and make sure that they're set. Obviously, after you've established the goals, then you're going to have to take a look and say, we currently have the infrastructure and obviously the services that will facilitate this. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because each one of you has to look at your own infrastructure. I know initially when we started this, a long, long time ago, 25 years ago, I hired one school-to-career transition specialist, and we centralized everything. Well, what happened was through the years we expanded to the point where I have 4 management teams, and each team serves different individuals from different school districts and so forth. So we've gone from centralizing to decentralizing. And we're constantly looking, and even this next fiscal year, we're looking at how we can structure our resources, our staffing, and so forth to make sure that we can meet the needs of the school systems. Because let me tell you, you better make sure you can do this, because you can't be approaching the school systems if you can't, and the only way you can deliver is you have the infrastructure and the services available. All right. You need to initiate outreach and services to schools and establish a positive relations. Okay, what does that mean? What we currently do is the school systems, and there are 10 of them here in Berkshire County, and they contract with us. They pay us to provide these school-to-career transition services. But how do we get to the point where all 10 school districts are using us? And it varies from year to year depending on the ages of the student and so forth. It started with, quite frankly, this is something that was near and dear to me. I ended up calling the SPED directors of each school system and said, listen, can we sit down and for 20 minutes, a half hour, and talk about your kids your students who are turning 22. 22 is the aging out date in Massachusetts, or people who are graduating. And I would do that every fall or every spring or thereabouts. I would initiate the outreach. But before I initiated the outreach, and this is really important, do you guys have marketing materials that you can give to not only the SPED directors, the SPED teachers, but also to parents that describe your services. So we had to have that. So when you're doing outreach, number one, you have to make sure that you have your infrastructure, you have your comprehensive service, and you also have your marketing materials. And then you sit down with you develop a relationship with the SPED directors. And quite frankly, what happened initially with us, the first school system that we've been doing vocational evaluations since the early, since like 1990, 1989 with school systems. But in 1996, we did our first school to career transition. And how did that happen? Well, it turned out that the student and the parents, it was what you would consider a real hot potato case, where the parents were not happy with the services. It was a challenging case, and so what happened was the school system called us up because they didn't have the resources and the staffing to provide it, and they asked us basically to help them meet the needs of that student. Well, in effect, we did, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But I guess my point is, initially what we found is that the school systems would refer some of the hot potatoes or hot cakes, the politically sensitive cases that they couldn't handle, and they asked us to do it. But then what ended up happening is that we ensured that we were successful with each case, and that led to, quite frankly, a system that an ongoing positive relationship with each of the school systems. So that we didn't get the political hotcakes. We started getting, just the average student, with disabilities and so forth that needed services and so forth. So it's very, very important. And quite frankly, I've been doing this for 20 years, and we still have to do outreach to the school systems. You would think after all these years, with the relationships and so forth, but we still have to call and say, hey, can you take 20 minutes, half hour? Can we sit down and look at your students and see who needs services, and how our program can help them. All right. Obviously the next key point is you've got to collaborate with the state agencies. I know in Iowa it's a little bit different than Massachusetts, but the two major agencies, it would be the Voc Rehab here and also the Department of Developmental Services that works with people with intellectual disabilities. But we end up, once again, doing outreach to the transition coordinators in both of those state agencies, going, look, do you have individuals that you would recommend? And also in turn, I've also been able to advocate for certain students that weren't even on the state agency's radar yet. And so, we're working with a student who's got 2 years left in school, and, we're recommending, saying, hey, this guy, Michael, you've got to make sure, that this person's going to get served. So we end up collaborating with the state agencies, both in terms of doing initiation with the school systems the state agencies to identify students aging out, and then B, ensuring that all of the process for making them eligible for service when they're adult occur. I'll give you a good example. There was a young student who we started doing school to career transitions with. The school, got us set up and so forth, and we're like, great, we got him a job and he's doing great. And we said, okay, he's going to be turning 22 in September, so I called the state agency and I said, look, Danny's turning 22, we got him a job, he's doing great. And the state agency personnel said, you know what, we don't even have her on the records. I'm like, what do you mean? Well, apparently the parent hadn't filled out an application for the services. I'm like, oh, jeepers. So we ended up assisting the parent in terms of filling out the paperwork and getting all that stuff, and we ensured that Danny was going to continue, literally his job and his services were not going to end, when he turned 22 or when he aged out of the school system. So, I could talk a long time about this, but the key on this is you providers, and quite frankly, you VR, if there are VR people here, as well as state agencies, as well as educators, it's absolutely critical that the key players coordinate to ensure that an individual does not get lost in the shuffle and literally get dropped off in a provider's doorstep when they either graduate or turn 22, because that has happened. And the way to avoid that is through collaboration. Okay. Being flexible in order to serve students with school. You have to have very flexible services. And why is that? Because based upon the age of the student, their course requirements, and what the school can afford, you could be dealing with any myriad of ways of serving the person. For example, we had this guy, Mark, who actually had 2 courses he had to take to graduate. Well, those courses didn't finish until he was able to take first and second period. He didn't get out till 9:30, quarter to 10. But they wanted him in a part-time work placement with it. So basically, we had to flex our schedule and not start him until 10. Now, the staffing-wise, that could be somewhat problematic, but we flexed it. Or in another case, we had a gentleman who we initially started working with, and they wanted him to go to school in the morning, and then we would provide services and vocational services, employment, and so forth in the afternoon. We did that. It's quite a challenge in terms of staffing to figure that out, and we've kind of gotten away from the half-day thing, try to go for full days. But the point being is that based upon the age of the student, their requirements, how much the school can afford, and also with the services they're looking for, you could be working with someone who's only needing a couple hours a week to 5 days a week. And if you really want to assist the school systems, you've got to be able to flex with that, and you might need to negotiate a little bit. But that's what you have to do in order to make this successful. Oh yeah, got to be very creative here, and this is where, and I know a lot of you people out there, and I see some of the people that I've worked with last fall. The person-centered planning approach is absolutely critical. We've and I'm not going to get into that because that's a whole other in-service altogether, but it's absolutely critical to do a person-centered career plan in order to assist a person to realize their career potential. For example, we had a gentleman who actually got into a motorcycle accident. He was in a motocross race when he was 14, became significantly traumatically brain injured. He was in a wheelchair, he had speech, he had cognitive disabilities, all sorts of difficulties. Well, when we sat down and did his career plan, he goes, I want to ride motorcycles, I want to be in the motorcycle business. And we're like, well, geez, Joe, I don't think we can help you ride motorcycles again, and we don't think it's a good idea. However, you want to be in the motorcycle business? All right, let's see what we can do. Well, to make a long story really short, we found there's a motorcycle shop here in this town that actually we worked with, who knew Joe and knew his story, knew his father and the whole bit. We ended up carving a job out for him in this motorcycle shop where he does inventory, he does detailing of the motorcycles, and he absolutely loves the job, and they absolutely love him. In the old days, that type of career match would not have occurred because people would have said, yeah, you know what, Joe, he's in a wheelchair, he doesn't have great use of his right arm, well, you can't really understand what he's saying. We didn't do that. We basically said, how can we help Joe in his aspiration for his career, and we did that, and actually he's been working at that motorcycle shop for, going on almost 10 years now. Okay. The big thing for you, I don't know what it is in Iowa, but in the state of Massachusetts, they changed the regulations. State educators, school districts, have to start a formal transition process at the age of 14. Now, I don't know what it is in Iowa, but it's probably somewhere in the same vicinity. The key on this is that you, as whether you're a state educator, voc rehab person, or particularly you providers, you've got to start this process early. By that, what do I mean? Well, ideally, preferred, you need to be involved in a student's, case and so forth, a minimum of 2 years before they graduate or turn 21 or leave school. You need to be involved in the IEP. You need to make sure that the parents are aware of your services, and then you're going to look at providing some type of service, hopefully in that second to last year, but absolutely no later than the last year of school. And hopefully, last year of school is the minimum. If you can work with someone, a few years at a time, that's even better. But the key on this is that you have to do your outreach, you have to do your collaboration, and you have to set up these services, at least 2 years before the person leaves school. I've done it a bunch of different ways. We've done it early when they've been 16. We've 16, and sometimes that doesn't work well. We've also done it where somebody contracts with us, like in March, till the giving us 3 months to find a person a job. That doesn't work real well either. Anyway, suffices to say, you've got to start this process early on all the things that I have just mentioned. Okay. Everybody with me? All right. All right, let's talk about some case studies here. All right, so this is Holly. Holly actually was technically our first full school to career transition person way back in like the mid to late 1990s. We had been doing vocational evaluations for school systems for a while, so they knew us. In this one school system, what happened was she was 21 years old, and the parents were like, look, Holly doesn't need to go to school anymore. She's not going to college. She doesn't want to go to college. Holly wants a job, and you guys need to do something. She shouldn't be attending classes. Well, the problem is the school system did not have the ability to go out and find internships, jobs, and all that kind of stuff, so they called us. And what happened was, what we ended up doing in Holly's last year of school is we set her up in 3 internships, in her career interest. I mean, she's an individual that needs to be in a accessible environment. She needs pretty much a desk job. She likes to do routine clerical kinds of work and so forth. So what we did is we set her up in 3 internships. Well, and guess what happened? Yeah, what happened was, which happens to a lot of high school and college kids when they do internships, she was hired by this employer, when she graduated school. And, she's an individual placement. She actually makes more money per hour. I think she's making close to $14 an hour, so she's making more than some of my staff are making, which we keep rather quiet. But she's been in here, and she's in an individual placement. She works for the vice president. That's her office. If you can see that, she actually has a name tag. And she's very successfully employed, and she's just so much a part of that. She does the Sunshine Club. She tracks people's birthdays and all this kind of stuff, and she's really just a part of that. But what ended up happening was with Holly, we were so successful with her that, back in the early, that year after year after year, that school system, and then others heard about us, they started utilizing our services as well. And so then what ended up happening was we worked with a number of people with the school systems and a number of people, in other school systems. And flash forward about 15 years later, this guy Dan comes to us, and here's what we did with Dan. We met with the school. He was turning 19, and he was tired of going to school as well. He's wanted to graduate with his class, but he still, needed services. So what we ended up doing when he was 19 is the school was going to provide him academic and functional academic skills for most of the week. They wanted us to find him just a very part-time job, and we ended up finding him a part-time job on Tuesdays and Thursday afternoons. He actually was doing some custodial cleaning. And what happened was he was very successful at that, and they were doing the functional academic skills. Well, then he came to us and said, my goal, I want to be working full-time. So I want to do something more. So he advocated for himself. He said, okay, Dan. So we ended up finding him a second part-time job. So in his when he turned 20, we got him a job at this place, the ski shop, where he was doing, merchandising and cleaning and so forth. So he had 2 part-time jobs. Well, and then he turned 21, and then he was reducing the amount of time he was in school. By the time he was 21, we found him 3 part-time jobs, and he was doing this magazine job. So he had 3 diverse jobs. He was spending, it was close to 20 hours working, and only about 10 hours in school. Well, by his last year in school, we found him a 4th part-time job, And he actually also got his driver's license as well. His goal was, so by the time he graduated, in his last year in school, he wasn't going to school. He was actually doing all 4 of these jobs. So rather than going to school because he'd aged out of it, he was tired of doing it and so forth and so on, he was working in four different jobs. Well, you flash forward, a few years later, and this is Dan. He's actually the produce guy at one of our local, what he decided to do, his 4th job, he really liked his 4th job. Actually, it was really funny. He said to me, Rick, this place has really good policies and procedures, and I like that, so I want to work here more. I'm like, okay, that's fine. So he eventually resigned, or we had somebody else take his other jobs, and so now he's working full-time at this grocery store of his own choice, and he makes, he's making like $11 an hour. He's in an individual placement. We do some follow-along, and he's also advocating for himself to, like you see him here on the produce department. First he started off as a bagger and all that kind of stuff, but now he's the produce guy. And once again, so that's a really good example of how we started with somebody when they were 19 and coordinated with the school. The school provided a lot of support, in academic instruction when they were 19, and then gradually that reduced and his employment increased to the point where, boom, he was fully employed in his last year of school. And he just walked, literally, he was already hooked in with a state agency, and it was just rubber stamping him going into adult services. All right. And then you get Bernard. It's a little fuzzy here in the picture. But this is Bernard, and he's a machine operator. And this is really interesting. We started working with Bernard when he was still in school, 2-3 years. And he's actually going to be turning 22 this February. But he was getting functional academic skills as well. And then we got him a part-time job working afternoons. Well, actually, let me go back for a second. He originally wanted to do work in like retail and so forth. So we got him a job, an internship in retail, and for some reason he just was having a difficult time with it. He didn't like the customer service stuff. So we had a meeting. I said, Bernard, what's up, And he goes, I really don't like this kind of work. And I said, well, what kind of work do you like? And he says, well, I really, when I did the vocational assessment, and Sue had me out doing some of that production work, I really like that work. And I said, okay. So what we ended up doing is we got him a short, like a 1-month work trial doing production work, and he did really, really well. And he said, boy, this is what I want to do. So then we ended up finding him a $10 an hour machine operator position, 20 hours a week, at this local operation. And actually this summer, they've actually put him on 40 hours a week. And, and he absolutely loves his job, he absolutely loves it. So this is a particular case where we started off in one particular career direction while he was still in school, found out that through some, trial by error, that, these were some of the things that he was interested, not interested in, and now he's very, very successfully employed and doing really, really well. And the bottom line is he's going to basically have a full-time job when he graduates, and, we're actually teaching him how to take the bus now to and from his job, and so then life is good. This is Ashley. What happened with Ashley, very similar. We started working with her 3 years ahead of time. She ended up going to a culinary arts program at our local community college, and she was also getting functional academics from the school system. And then we were working with her on her career interest, which originally was animal care. Well, what happened was she finished that culinary arts, and she decided, you know what, I'm not really that interested. I like animal care, but that's something I could do. I could volunteer for. I really want to do food service. So we ended up getting her an internship, at this local, it's this humongous place called Capallo. It's this humongous resort that does, health stuff. Anyway, she now is, a prep cook. I don't know if you can see it on there, but she's a prep cook, for this place. She got hired by the company, and but here's the thing, and this is an important point. She doesn't attend a sheltered workshop. She only works at this job part-time, but she also volunteers at the animal shelter part-time, and she also does, she's very active, she also is involved in a couple of recreational groups. So here's an individual who does not go to a sheltered workshop. We transition her, she works part-time, she volunteers in animal care, she also does, she's also involved in some recreational activities. So she has a full life that does not involve being in a sheltered workshop and yet only working part-time. All right, let's keep going. This is Charlie. All right. What happened was a couple of years ago, we've been doing school to career transitions, for many, many years. And what's happened is with our knowledge of the school systems, what happened was a couple of years ago, 6 out of the 6 students that were aging out were all on the autism spectrum. It was unbelievable. And we started working with them, and we also realized, well, first of all, there's a lot of people on the spectrum, and this looks like it's going to be a trend. And we also realized that there were several people that full-time competitive employment, quite frankly, was not going to be realistic for several of these individuals. And what we had to do, and we don't have a sheltered workshop, so what do you do? Well, what we ended up doing is we ended up creating out here in Massachusetts called Community-Based Day Services. It's a transition program. It's something in between, I don't know if you have it in Iowa, but it's something in between the Medicaid-funded rehabilitation services and employment services. But it has the components of both. So in this particular case with Charlie, we ended up, Charlie, is on the spectrum. He needs a lot of, he's an incredible employee, and he loves routine accounting stuff. So we found him a job in this accounting department, and most of the time he scans, and he's unbelievable at it. And he also does some other clerical stuff for this accounting department, and he just works. It's unbelievable, and he's got natural supports there. But he works there part-time. The other part of his week, he attends, we have a transition services. So he gets a lot of work on communication, because what he'll do is he's echolalic. He'll just repeat what you say him. So they're working on his communication. They're also working on his physical activities to help him, with his help him lose weight, to be quite frank, as well as some of his functional academic skills and functional life skills. So what happens here with Charlie, and by the way, Charlie is actually turning 22 on August 20th. So this past year, we were able to, actually we got him another internship, but suffices to say, he's working part-time as a clerical assistant, and he's attending a program of services that provides functional life skills in preparation for his integrated employment. And he started these services literally when he was 21. And when he turns 22, he's already got a job, and he's already in our transition services, and we already have goals and objectives for him. So we were able to. So this is sort of the future of services. What do you do? If you don't have a sheltered workshop? Well, we've come up with a myriad of ways of dealing with that, specifically with the school, with students aging out of school, whether it's Ashley coming up with volunteer activities or Charlie, getting services through our transitions program. Well, there you go. Well, all right. So, in essence, I wanted to leave some time here for some questions and some answers here. But, in sum, having a commitment to creating successful school to career transitions is the key point for doing this. Having the infrastructure, having the collaboration, and having a very person-centered, proactive approach is, quite frankly, the most critical factors for doing this. And I'll tell you, for me, the school to career transition stuff is extraordinarily rewarding. When you have parents come up to you and say, I never in my life thought that Charlie or, Ashley or whomever were going to, be able to get up, make their lunch, take the bus and go to work, and, it's unbelievable. And when the employers come and say, boy, we absolutely love having this person work here. And then you have the individual who, gets their first paycheck, and they're like, yahoo, look at this, I'm rich. It's absolutely rewarding. And it's why we do what we do here out here in Western Massachusetts. So I moved fairly quickly, through this presentation. I'm certainly open to any kinds of questions. I guess you can type them in. Is that right, Jessica?
Rick, this is Dave, and yes, if you have questions, please type them into the pod on your screen, and we'll get them relayed back to Rick. Rick, you covered just a ton of information there, and I feel good because fortunately we've reinforced some of that messaging through our IFirst work, so I think we're heading in the right direction, and I love the stories on people like Joe and Holly and Dan. We've heard a lot of those stories here in Iowa. Unfortunately, we also have heard of some John stories where people go through the system and get lost in the gaps, and we haven't done a good job. Could you share a little more specific information about what one of your school contracts, what does it look like? What does it involve? What's the role as you implement that with the state VR agency? Are you finding any opportunities to work with the local workforce Department of Labor groups? So maybe just take a couple minutes and go into a little bit more detail on what one of those contracts might look like for you in Berkshire.
Well, that's a very good point, and I'm sorry because I actually had it in my presentation. I must have skipped over it. Anyway, basically what I end up doing is, or with myself or my staff, we meet with the school district. We identify what services, whether it's a vocational assessment, skills training, part-time jobs, whatever. We actually get right down to brass tacks. We look at the number of hours per week, whether it's going to be the school year, the fiscal year, or whatever. And then what happens is then I draw up what we call a proposal or a letter of agreement that basically states what we're going to provide and what the school is going to provide. And currently, I'll be upfront with you. We're charging $30 an hour for the services. So that's what we do. And I'm giving you the latest on this. We've gone through a series of changes. We used to have a day rate, then we had an hourly rate, and quite frankly, I just got rid of the day rate, and we just do an hourly rate. There have been some cases where we've done exceptions to that. If we get somebody who requires a line-of-sight supervision, who's very, very difficult, we might charge more. And in some cases, we might charge less. But typically, that's our standard. So, so we come up with a base rate. We do a letter of agreement. The school district signs. We sign, and everybody gets copies. So that's the contractual part to that. And I'm distinctly aware of how fiscally responsible we need to be with the school systems. So I try to minimize costs. So, for example, back 20 years ago, we used to do vocational assessments that were like a month long. We don't do that anymore. We take a look, and we'll do a vocational assessment anywhere from 20 to 60 hours, depending upon the student and so forth. So we really have scaled down our services. And you have to be very careful because you don't want to, you've got to be able to cover your costs, but you also have to be distinctly aware of the costs of the school system. In terms of collaboration, I kind of missed the second part of your question, but we work with the VRs, and yes, we work with the Department of Labor, their local office here. We do all of that. We're well networked with all of the career centers and so forth out here, and work with them.
Rick,
Did that answer?
Yeah, you bet. As you talk about the school contract, I would imagine some of the students would transition also into adult service delivery where either like the Medicaid or VR might fund some of those programs. Does that happen in your area?
Well, it's interesting you mention that because there's new federal regulations, and if there's any VR people here, in the state of Massachusetts, they have to allocate 15% of their budget for school-to-career transition. So this is a huge year across the state because the federal guidelines now are saying the VR services have got to provide pre-vocational services. So this is going to open up. Typically, we have not worked with a lot of students who eventually go to the VR system. But this year is going to be huge because we were applying for a grant and so forth and so on. Most of the people we've been working with are not on that track, but they will be, and although we have had some. Now, in terms of the adult services, yes, we have done that as well. We have had well, that guy, Joe, that I mentioned to you, the guy with the motorcycle.
Rick, a follow-up question on that is if you could maybe share a little bit about the specifics related to your new transition services program. Could you share a little bit more information for the audience on that? Rick, we've lost you. We can't hear you right now. I don't know if you can hear us. You're still showing up as visible on our screen, but we're not getting any audio from you.
Hello?
Hey, there you are. You disappeared for us for a second. Are you back?
I'm back. Okay.
Hey, great.
We good? All right,
you
so,
bet. We heard your answer regarding the examples of the school contract and partnering with some of the adult services. A follow-up question to that was if you might share a little bit more specifics about what your transition services program looks like today and what your vision for that is in the future.
okay. The transitions program, and this is very important, the philosophy and intent is to prepare, well, we focused on young people, but it doesn't necessarily have to be this, but to prepare them for the world of work and functional living. So everything is geared for identifying and assessing, what a person needs to be able to function in a job or out in the community. So, we look at, functional, functional skills like being able to, like volunteering and, doing Meals on Wheels where, being able to interface appropriately in a public place. We deal with money management skills, being able to open up a checking account or being able to count money, work ethics, work habits, those kinds of skills are done. And we try to do a lot of these in the community as well. We try to make it more community-based. And it's a trick, believe me, when you got 3 or 4 people, how do you do this with 3 or 4 people? But philosophically, the program is geared for helping young people at this point prepare for the, and be part of the real world, specifically the world of work. So, and which means it's very different than a habilitation program. Like, we don't offer physical therapy, OT, PT, or speech. None of that is in the transitions program.
Rick, what are your funding sources for some of those service options?
Well, you had to bring up the SOAR because the state of Massachusetts they currently have what's called community-based day services, CBDS, but it's currently, quite frankly, it's a very poor funding source, and we're fighting for them to get a better things, and quite frankly we're getting some grants for program supplies and all that kind of stuff because the funding is not particularly great, and we're going to fight to get the rates changed.
I think we've a lot of similarities and efforts that we've been working on to get to that same point. So I think the timing for the discussions are good, and it lays a good foundation for next month's Community of Practice. This has been a great example, again, of a collaborative effort with Employment First and the Iowa Coalition for Integrated Employment, who helped bring Rick to our attention and helped sponsor this. So thank you, Jessica. I'm going to turn it over to Jessica maybe for a final comment here. And Rick, thank you so much for sharing some time with Iowa. I know the providers that have had a chance to work with you in the past were so positive, so we appreciate you being involved and messaging it out to a little larger audience today. So Jessica, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, David, and thanks again, Rick. As David mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, our next webinars are August 25th, and that'll be the second part of the School to Work and Successful Practices in Transition with Kim and Richard and Janet and Cindy. And then September is when we'll wrap everything up with a look back and review. Again, September 22nd with Bill, David, Shannon, and Representative Heaton. Kathy is opening up the polls right now, so please let us know what you thought of today's webinar. We really appreciate your feedback. Rick's presentation is in the lower left-hand corner for you to download, but we'll also send that out along with the closed captioning transcript. And I think that's it, just the closed captioning transcript and the presentation. Let us know if you have any questions or follow-up that we can forward on to Rick. We'd be happy to do that. And thanks again for joining us, and thank you again, Rick. We'll see you all in August.
Just in closing, I'd like to say hello. I see some people from Cass and from Hope Haven. I say hello. I wonder if some of the same people. Good to see your names again. And thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, Rick. We appreciate it. We'll see you all in August. Have a good rest of the day.
Take care.
Take care. Thanks, Rick.